This is me. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's final EGX theatre session. I'm Chris Brett from Eurogamer, and I can't really believe I'm about to get paid to do this because I'm joined by two people that I have an awful lot of respect for. We have the creator of the original UFO Enemy Unknown, Julian Gollop, and the man that he would... Yes, please, come on. And also the man that he would inspire to go on to create XCOM Enemy Unknown, Jake Solomon. And yeah, today we're gonna, this session's gonna be all about the past, present, and future of the XCOM franchise and the genre that it's really cemented. So yeah, if we could have one big, massive round of applause for the two of these guys, and we'll get started. I should also point out that there's going to be time for questions at the very end of the session. So if you have anything that comes to mind throughout this, please do save them. And I think we're going to save like about 10 to 15 minutes at the end to present them to both Jake and Julian. So that'll be great. I think we'll start with something...
That image is amazing, by the way.
Oh, yes.
That's pretty great.
Yeah, yeah. Annie on the design team did a great job with this, I should say. That is great. Past and present, love it. The question I think we should start with is, you guys actually like each other? Like, what is that all about?
Publicly, yes. Yes, we do. We have
It's all a facade.
We have an arrangement.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I mean, I like Julian anyway. For me, it's a dream. It's a different relationship, obviously. So for me, I'm always, you know, I'm normally not a guy who can't talk, but yes, for me, it's amazing to be able to have Julian as a friend, as a resource, where we can, the last time we got together at E3, we're like bouncing ideas off each other. I couldn't believe it. It was awesome. So. And
to some extent, competition. Do you guys see it like that at all or not?
I think no, because actually I owe Jake a huge amount for actually resurrecting the genre, which was, when you think about it, was actually dead and buried in a way back with XCOM Apocalypse in 1997, because XCOM went off in this weird direction after that.
Yeah, it's pretty weird.
Yeah, so now with XCOM Enemy Unknown in 2012, all these years later, I think Jake and his team at Firaxis have proved conclusively the genre is not dead. So for that, I'm eternally grateful.
It's the best moment of my life. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's not, and it's also not competition, because, and Julian and I have talked about this, like we are blessed to be in a genre where good games, I think, only increase the size of the audience. It's not like there's no oxygen left in the room with the types of games that we make. So if XCOM 2 is good, that's good for Phoenix Point. If Phoenix Point is good, that's good for XCOM franchise. Mario Rabbids, if that's good, which it was. And those things all, we're blessed to be in this genre where it's not a zero-sum game, and I think we help each other. I want all these games to be good, so.
Nice. Well, me too. I think we should probably start with you, Julian, in terms of the origin of XCOM, or UFO Enemy Unknown, as it was known over here. Can you talk to me about the initial pitch for that game? It wasn't actually a pitch for XCOM, right?
No, not at all. I'd made this very obscure game on the 8-bit computers called Laser Squad, and we took a demo to Microprose, which we called Laser Squad 2, but all it had was a tactical game engine. That was the pitch we gave them, but what they wanted was a game that was much bigger, that would compete with in particular Civilization. And actually Sid Meier's got more responsibility for the creation of XCOM than he realizes. He doesn't know this at all, probably, but the reason they wanted us to change the Laser Squad 2 demo was to make this much, much bigger game, and they said, we've got to have a research tree, we've got to have a Civilopedia equivalent, it's got to be set on Earth. They had no idea what this game design was going to be. They just knew it had to have these features because Civilization had them, and Microprose UK wanted to beat Microprose US at their own game, creating a game which was, as big and as impressive as Civilization. That was it. That was basically what they wanted. And so from that, we had to work out what this game was going to be. They wanted the theme, by the way, set on UFOs, which was great. I thought it was a brilliant idea. We went with that. But I had to go away and come up with some idea how this game was actually going to work. And that's when we came up with this Geoscape, Battlescape idea, this division between the strategic layer and the tactical layer, and how they interact, on the top of it with all the research and politics stuff. So, and that all came out of just that combination of Laser Squad 2, plus we want a Civilization beta.
Yeah.
Can I ask you real quick, just as a designer, when did you know that whole back and forth was working? Was it early on, or were you like, this is being forced on me to like make this work, or did you know like pretty early on, like, oh, this is pretty good?
Well, interestingly, the final game turned out very close to my original design, but I would have to say it wasn't actually really working very well until a few months before the game was actually finished. Yeah. And the reason for that is that our schedule, we started working on the tactical side of the game, and we just dropped that because we were behind schedule. We thought, oh, we better get this Geoscape done, and we were behind on that, so we ended up with two separate things, and they weren't working together very well. I had an idea of how it was going to work, but really the actual game itself was not really coming together until just a few months, 3-4 months before the game was finished.
Well, I think you landed it in the end. So I've interviewed the two of you a number of times now at Eurogamer, and I remember after hearing that story from you, Julian, mentioning it to you at one point, Jake, I was like, so he said that like a really big thing was the feeling of competition with Civilization.
Yeah.
You found that quite relatable.
Yeah, I know what that feels like, to try and compete with the beast that is Civilization. If they weren't such nice guys, they'd be bastards, but no,
yeah.
they're...
Are you going to tell Sid that he is even more responsible for the XCOM franchise than he realizes?
No. Yeah, that's pretty remarkable. I mean, am I remembering this right? Geoscape, Battlescape, were those two separate EXEs?
They were, yes. They were because we couldn't fit within our memory limitations. So our spec for the game was 2 megabytes of extended memory for a PC. It's actually not a huge amount. And we literally had to separate them to two separate X's, and one had to load up the other.
Interception was another EXE as well?
No, that was all together
in
that was part of the Geoscape, although we did
Sorry, we're a nerdy programmer here for a second.
Although the original interception sequence that we implemented was actually from a first-person view. It had the sprite scaling stuff going on. And yeah, it was rubbish. Yeah, we
really?
Yeah.
It was first person?
It was, yeah. You had the cloudy sky, you had this UFO, it came close to you, it sort of scaled up, you fired rockets, and went zoom like that.
So we did, our first interception was an actual 3D jet flying, and it was like third person, but over a jet flying, and it was like shooting missiles, but it was like an arcade game, and so it didn't work either.
Yeah, so. Okay, the same conclusion that we came to originally. It just didn't look right for the style of the game. They said, no, this is actually, the Microprose UK says, no, this is not working. You've got to change this. And I was very sad at the time, I must admit. But we junked it. So.
Yeah. There's also a very, very surprising anecdote, which I learned from you, Julian, about the development of that first game, is that the game was actually cancelled whilst you were making it, but nobody told you.
No, and actually it's really good they didn't tell us, because we would have freaked out.
Otherwise you would have stopped making it.
We were a zombie game. We're actually living without the authority of the publisher. It was only kept going because of just a couple of guys at Microprose UK, and because all of the guys working on it, apart from one who's working in the art department there, were sort of external. So me and Nick were working in Harlow and Essex. One of the artists was working from home, and the other artist was about. So it managed to go under the radar because it was such a kind of small project. It wasn't a big budget project, and even though it went on for a long time, they kept it alive.
Yeah, I've actually spoken to some of the guys at Microprose UK about that moment, and I think because there was only one artist that worked from that office.
Yeah.
It was quite easy that if anyone visited, they could just be like, yeah, just Alt Tab, put something else on your screen for a little bit. It'll be fine.
One artist.
Yeah.
Well, we had one artist doing the characters, one artist doing the environment stuff. That was it. We had one more artist towards the end of the project, but she had a problem with her PC because when she had to have a specially shielded PC because she kept crashing it.
Wow.
And I'm not sure they ever fixed that problem permanently.
So there may be a bunch of XCOM art out there
Yeah,
somewhere.
maybe she was actually an alien. I don't know.
Jake, how many artists do you have on your team? Any idea?
3 times a big number, let's say, a very big number, 3 something, yeah.
Okay, so the game we're talking about here, UFO Enemy Unknown, was obviously is probably the game that had the biggest impact on your life, I guess. Can you remember the first time you played it, or the early
I
moments?
don't remember specifically the first time, but what I remember was that I played it in high school, and I played it late at night. I think it came out in like December or something like that in the U.S. But I remember played it in high school and played it super, super late into the night. And UFO Defense still has that. When you play it, it has this it's spookier for sure. It has this very spooky feel. And in fact, my art director and I, we still talk about the fact that you would see sectoids out there in the cornfields, and if they're right at the edge of the light, you would see this like glimmer in their eyes. It was very spooky. It was.
Yeah, well, we were trying to make it that way. And it all stems from this day and night cycle that Nick did on the day. And I thought, look, how do we do a nighttime mission? So we had to, the way we did it is kind of by having these palette gradients, 16 palette gradients. And obviously some colors faded at a different rate than others. So I think the way the artist did it was really, really well done, actually.
Yeah, I mean, that, to me, is a very iconic thing, is that sort of glimmer of the eyes out there. And yeah, I mean, it just is there's something about XCOM where it feels like it reflects the mood of the game, where it feels a little cold and like the game doesn't care, like it's a simulation, which is, again, very much Julian's style, as it's much more of a simulation. And so it's cool because you feel like you have this freedom, but also at the same time, the game is not going to do anything to help you out. Like if you're not playing it well, the game is just going to continue to march on, and the world's going to move on. And you just lost the invasion. And so I just remember that being the first time I'd experienced a game like that, where it felt like it's like a world on the other side of the monitor. It felt like there was this entirely self-contained world that functioned with its own rules, and it just felt very authentic, I guess.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about this before, Jake, the idea that the game, like XCOM Enemy Unknown, isn't a puzzle game to solve, but rather something to, like, you just hold on as best you can and hopefully make it to the end. Is that something you'd agree with? Or was that a similar thought that you had in the early days?
Yes, I guess Jake's right. I mean, I have a more simulation-y approach to the design. I'm more interested in these interesting systems and how the player interacts with it. But there is one thing that we did have to do with the original XCOM, which probably made it playable in the end. And that was, I'm afraid to admit this really, but it had a sort of dynamic difficulty. It did have a dynamic difficulty adjustment in it. And the reason I put this in, and the way it worked was very simple. If you were losing the last 2 or 3 battles, it stopped progressing the aliens. But if you were won the last 3
don't tell me this. I don't want to know this.
It actually, they resumed their progression along their.
Really?
Yeah. So, but the reason I put this in was because I had never played the game from start to finish, and I was panicking. I said, how the hell do I know whether this game is balanced for difficulty? There's no way I can.
God!
And we had a QA team on the project. There was 4 guys, and we had like 2 months to finish it. And I was desperate to figure out this problem, how to make the game sort of evenly balanced. And literally 2 months before the end of the game, I put this dynamic difficulty adjustment system in because I felt we couldn't playtest it. And that probably actually made the game playable.
Yeah.
Without it, it really would have screwed you up.
Whoa!
Jake, you've taken this very poorly.
Whoa! I mean, we do the same thing with percentages, chances to hit at lower difficulties. Those are not entirely what you see on the screen. May not be entirely true. We do some things. If the players had a streak of bad luck, like they've missed 2 good shots, we record that and you have to. I think you have to do something.
Something I've noticed about the both of you talking about these kind of systems that aren't completely, they're fibbing a little bit to the player, is that you both feel a little embarrassed about it. Like you don't want people to know that.
Well, yeah. Are you embarrassed, Julian?
A little bit. I think it's down to, the player in a way is being deceived and you're deceiving him, but he doesn't know he's being deceived. But then he's enjoying the game anyway, so you don't tell him, don't spoil his fun. And the reality is, unfortunately, a lot of games nowadays are designed this way. I mean, I did it then because I was panicking about the overall game balance where you just didn't have time to play test it. But it is true to say that many, if not most games these days do have dynamic difficulty adjusting things in to make sure the player has a consistent level of challenge. Maybe XCOM 2 is, I thought it didn't have it in because it was so brutally difficult, but then maybe that's just because I'm crap in the game.
No, there is no dynamic difficulty,
no,
actually.
So, yeah, okay, you did it the honest way then.
Well,
did,
some things honest, yeah.
Okay, so we talked about the first moment you played the original game and the impact it had. Do you remember exactly when it was that you realized, I think I'd like to make something like this?
Yeah, I mean, it had always been my favorite game, and then I went to school, and that's why I got a degree in computer science. It is definitely because of XCOM. I mean, because of that, I started playing more strategy games, but in my mind, I got a computer science degree because I thought, wow, I would love to make games. And so, yeah, it's the whole reason I got a degree. It's the whole reason I applied to Firaxis, which was the only place I applied. I applied to most of the jobs I was applying for, like business consulting. So in most of the alternate universes out there, I'm wearing a suit and tie and trying to sell somebody on ERP software or something. I don't know. But yeah, it's really what drove me to get my degree, and that was always a dream. I can say honestly, didn't think it would happen. I didn't think I would actually get a job in games, but it's the reason I got my degree, and then sort of, not on a lark, but I kind of applied to Firaxis because that's the only place to me that was making those kinds of games.
Yeah, as far as I understand, your pitch was a little more to the point than Julian's, which was, I'd like to make XCOM now, please.
Yeah.
But once again, Civilization helped justify its existence, or the existence of the reboot, right?
It wouldn't exist. I think that our publisher, I give a lot of credit. I give a lot of credit to 2K and to Take-Two, because I honestly think that in 2000, and anything that's come out of XCOM existing, I think comes out of this, out of Civ existing, because we had a publisher that we could say, no, you can sell millions of copies of a turn-based game. You can do that. And I think if we'd said that to anybody else, they would have been, hey. But we could say, like, no, we do it. Like, we think there's another way, there's another game that is ripe for a modern audience. And so, yeah, I mean, Civ is definitely one of the main reasons why we could even pitch a game like XCOM.
Julian, how does it feel playing the Firaxis version of XCOM to see something so heavily inspired by your own work?
It was amazing, actually. The first time I played XCOM Enemy Unknown, I thought these guys had really nailed it in terms of a really tense, exciting turn-based gameplay, because that's what I was always striving for, to get that real interesting tension. And this decision-making is always going to be important. Which guy you're going to move, where you're going to move, etc. I mean, I played so many turn-based games which are very boring because you're just repeating, moving characters all around, and it's very dull. And I thought it was absolutely amazing. And there were some very curious design decisions in there. Actually, one thing I want to ask...
Curious to go
Can we
way
just
here.
end this now, though? I mean, what he just said was wonderful.
I'm going to ask you this question. You can't get out of it because you're in front of these guys.
No,
So,
I don't want to. Yes.
One thing
there
was
were many curious design decisions, I agree, yes.
So this pod activation mechanic,
Yes.
Why did he put it in, and how did it come about?
So, yeah, the idea of pods came about because for us, it only worked when you were facing a certain number of enemies. So the way XCOM works, and you've got this single action that you can take. So if it's more soldiers than enemies, the balance shifts very heavily to XCOM. There's so much damage output, and especially because your squad can get larger and larger, there's so much damage output that a player can do that we have to group the enemies up together in pods so we can guarantee that every time you meet a new enemy, you're meeting 3 new enemies or 4 new enemies. And so that's basically where it came out of. It was basically a pacing thing. So we could say, like, these aliens are here, these aliens are here. We pace them over the course of the map. And in XCOM 2, it's a little more procedural in terms of how they walk around. But in Enemy Unknown, we said we want to band them along the line of play. And we can guarantee when you see a new one, you see 3 of them. So it's never just this, like, there's one alien, kill him with 3 guys. There's one alien, kill him with 3 guys.
But they get a free move. When you spot them, they all rush into position. And is that to give you
Well, yes, your mic's cutting out. I gotta. No. Yes, that's true. So the scamper, as we call it. And so the idea is, what we could do is have the aliens, I guess, sitting in cover. You know, cover is so vitally important to the game. There are a couple things we could do. But for us, it was the easiest thing to say, like, well, you get this nice little cinematic moment where they're doing alien-y things, and then they run into cover, and then that's when the game really starts.
So it basically, this sort of free deployment move sets up an interesting encounter.
Yeah.
Every time is the idea.
Right. Yeah, right. And one of the interesting things is that a lot of people will notice, oh, the AI did this, they did that, and a lot of things we do, so they'll run into cover, and a lot of times they won't take the best cover. We have all these rules for they don't make good tactical decisions because that wouldn't make for the vast majority of players, that wouldn't make for a very fun game. So instead, they get closer than they should, so the player has opportunities to flank them. They always take varying types of cover. If they wanted to go into high cover, they could. But then what that means is that when you're aiming at enemies, you see the same number over and over, and there's no real decision. It's just like, I don't care who I'm shooting at. It's an 83 and an 83 and 83 as opposed to low number, high number, low number, which makes it more interesting too. So. Oh
my God, you're learning from each other. This is amazing.
That's right. Fuse us together.
It's an interesting point to kick off for my next question, actually, which is that today you're both making games that are clearly stem from that '94 original, but you're both going in slightly different directions with your design. And I wonder what sort of core principles or core rules define an XCOM type game. Is there anything that you have to have in a game like this? And what are you happy
Julian's got to answer
scrap?
that one first. I would like to. I'm just gonna whatever he says. I'm gonna be like, that was also what I was going to say.
I think, well, at its core, it has to be turn-based, tactical, squad-based system. I mean, without doubt. But that alone is not enough. I think it also probably has to have a kind of permadeath thing going on with your squad characters, because otherwise you're not going to get that invested in them about their loss. There has to be some kind of strategic and tactical layer that's interacting. Although it's clear that through all of the XCOM games, and even with Phoenix Point, the strategic layer of the game is the thing that has changed the most dramatically. Even from the first XCOM to XCOM Apocalypse, were very different, and XCOM Enemy Unknown to XCOM 2, very different approach. It's almost like we can't quite decide what's the best way to do that side of the game, maybe.
I think that's very true.
But on the other hand, it means there's a lot of scope for innovating in that side of things. I find it much more difficult now to innovate on the tactical side because it was done so well in XCOM 2. It's really difficult to do a better implementation of the core rules and core experience that's in that game.
Are you okay, Jake, after hearing that? It's quite a compliment.
Yes. I hope you're recording this somewhere. Just in case anybody disagrees with me in the future, I'll be like, excuse me, actually, let me cue up the Julian clip here. I think that's true. The strategy thing is very true. And I find it to be the hardest thing to design. Tactical for me, and again, Julian's a different designer, much more simulation-based, but tactical is it's easier for me to design, it's very clear, thinking about it, but the strategy stuff, you could go so many different ways, and it has to be organic to some extent, which isn't really my strong suit as a designer, but I think that the strategy layer can be so different based on the narrative that you want to follow, based on how you want the missions to be strung together. There's soldier progression, there's mission generation, there's base building, all of those elements and how they interact. And yeah, I think strategy will always be the thing that's probably most different from game to game.
And yes, it's true, but there's also one thing which XCOM 2 in particular has done amazingly well, and it kind of was there in the original XCOM, but this is the soldier customization system, which in XCOM 2, especially with War of the Chosen, I think is just absolutely amazing. I almost think, I don't know if you agree with this, Jake, but it almost feels like it's verging on like an RPG game.
Yeah.
And with War of the Chosen, especially your focus on characters and more interaction with particular NPC characters, it almost feels like it's more RPG-oriented, but with some really great tactical mechanics, because a lot of RPGs really suck with their sort of tactical systems. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I would. I think that was clearly one of the things we want to do with War of the Chosen. That's why we had soldier bonds. We were trying to think of ways to like double down on your characters, your soldiers as characters. We don't want them to be scripted characters necessarily. We want them to still be, their narrative is generated by the player. But so anything we can do though to put more narrative, more tools at the player's disposal to make narrative. So that's where things like the bonds and the photo booth even, that's where they came out of, is this idea of like, this is going to get you even more invested in your soldiers. And so yeah, I think we think of it as, we certainly think of it as, you know, it's still tactics, but RPG elements are a big part of it for sure. Okay,
so here's something that wasn't necessarily mentioned in those core principles. There is a big conversation topic, especially with the Phyrexis games, I think. You didn't mention that time units should be a defining part of XCOM. What do you both think about that?
I don't think, no, not necessarily. No. I mean, the two action point system, I thought was really cool because it refines your decision-making process, keeps the pace of the game going, and typically if you were playing in an optimal way in the original XCOM, you would want to creep forward with your soldiers step by step, which is not optimal for, you know, interesting and fun gameplay experience. So I guess the real trick in designing a good strategy game is to make the optimal strategy that a player can use to also be the most fun and engaging and fast-paced way to play the game. And that's a really big problem. And I think this is one which the XCOM Enemy Unknown sort of nailed really well. Is on XCOM 2 arguably did a bit better as well, is that it kept the pace of the game going with, you know, the optimal approach to it is still works really well from the fun factor of the game, which is really, really impressive.
There's another clip for you to send to people, Jake, if you need it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does come down to, you have to give the player has to make suboptimal decisions. They have to. If they're allowed to sit back and just say like, this is the best move, they're going to do that every time. And when the player doesn't take risks, then, I mean, the fun part of strategy games and tactics games is that you have a plan and then it goes wrong, and then you develop a new plan on the fly, and you get to feel like, oh, I know these systems really well, I'm designing on the fly, I'm having this dynamic experience, and those are the stories you then tell the next day. Is like, oh, and then the wall broke down. And so I think forcing the player to make suboptimal decisions, somehow encoding that in the game rules, is really, really important, and the player knowing like, all right, I got to take risks, this isn't the best thing, but I'll find a way out of it. And I think that is a constantly difficult problem with design.
Yeah, one thing you have to take risks on is, and it's a really interesting feature of XCOM, is the fact you've developed these soldiers, they're really powerful. If you put them into battle, you risk them being killed. So there's a very strong risk-reward mechanic there about how you deploy your soldiers. I noticed you put something new and more of the Chosen about them being tired. Are you trying to encourage the player to actually develop more of a squad rather than focus on the on the elite that you've developed.
Yeah, and to force you towards the end of the game, you know, a lot of times players could get to a point where they wouldn't even take wounds at the end of the game. And so just forcing the player to cycle in a much larger squad. The covert ops do that as well. You got to send soldiers away. You got to train them with their bonds. And so you build up this much larger squad, which actually makes the game easier too. If you do lose soldiers, you've still got a lot more people to sort of pick up the slack. But yeah, forcing people to not hone in on 6 mega soldiers, and that's their only stories they can tell.
Okay, so this is going to be my final question. If anyone in the audience would like to ask anything, please do feel free to start queuing up in front of this microphone in the middle now, and then, yes. Oh, brave, great. But just whilst we get that prepped, let's talk a little bit about the future of XCOM. I think, as you mentioned, Julian, since 2012's Enemy Unknown, feels like there's been a real resurgence for turn-based tactical. We've seen, like, there's a Mario one now. Things are changing, and the genre is moving forwards in different directions. Do you guys have anything to say about what you think will happen to the future of turn-based tactical?
I think the future is looking bright. Phoenix Point is doing great. We raised a lot of money on FIG, which is brilliant. So we're actually able to fund the game that I really want to do, have been wanting to do for so many years. Mario Rabbids, really interesting because it obviously owes a lot to the modern XCOM.
Should have had permadeath though, right?
Well, yeah, it doesn't quite qualify as an XCOM game, no. But what it does have is really engaging turn-based tactics mechanics, and which has been so rare for such a long time that I'm really overjoyed. And I think in the future is. It's still difficult to make these games, for sure, as Jake will testify. Still not easy. And I think there's still a long way to go in terms of the way the mechanics, the AI, and the interactions work. There's still a long way to go about the interactions of strategic and tactical layers. One thing we're trying to do with Phoenix Point, which is a bit different, is that we have a dynamic strategic layer, which is much more a bit like a 4X game in the way it works. In terms it has AI control of different factions and different NPCs, which is an interesting kind of approach. It kind of borrows a lot from XCOM Apocalypse, but it is also something new. And I'm sure there's going to be other new games coming out trying to innovate again on the basic ideas.
How about you, Jake? Future XCOM?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was fun for me when I played Mario Rabbids. It takes, and it's obviously its own game, but it borrows some of the tactics stuff. And so their tactics battles feel very much like a puzzle. Like so I would say like, oh, XCOM's not a puzzle, but their game feels very much like a puzzle. It's very fun because it totally triggers a different part of like my fun sensors where it's like, oh, you really should set this up exactly this way. And it's really cool because there's that. And then Julian's definitely a master of the more dynamic systems, which I think are also really interesting. And that's, you know, what XCOM was to me as a player. And then I've always been sort of more in the rules-based gameplay in the middle. And so I don't know, it's a very interesting time. When I think of War of the Chosen and XCOM 2, my team and I are at this really interesting point now where we're kind of like questioning everything. And then, you know, everybody knows I'm not afraid to steal from Julian. So we shall see. Phoenix Point is going to be awesome.
Cool.
I'm excited to see it.
The future is bright. I like that. That's great. Okay, I guess we'll go ahead to the audience questions.
Hi. Okay, so I have a question regarding modding, XCOM 2.
Yeah.
Okay, so seeing as how community modding would presumably play quite a big role in XCOM 2's future, well, not a big one, but a role at least.
Yeah, sure.
Would there be perhaps any consideration into pushing its moddability even further? Like, for example, might be getting a bit technical here, but like making it so that multiple mods can edit the same class as opposed to like one of them just like, you know, competing for dominance and then one of them just, yeah, and like maybe having like native classes a bit less like locked down, because like if you see something and you're like, oh, I want to fix that. Oh, not fixed, sorry. Like,
no, you're fine. I totally get what you're saying. And yes, I would say that our plans with XCOM specifically, we've seen such value from modding, and I think it, again, you know, in the types of games we make, and this is going to be the same for Snapshot as well, we can't put out games and then just say like, you know, you go buy it, you know, you'll buy it, you know. We don't have, our relationship with our audience has to be very close. We have to use their values to like determine what our future is. And it's not, we don't consider ourselves, my team and I, we're not like auteurs who just say like, well, we're gonna make this game and you're gonna like it or you won't. That would never work for a strategy. I mean, you have to have a very close relationship with your audience. That's how you see a lot of strategy studios, Paradox, Firaxis. I think that, and obviously you're crowdfunded, you have to have a relationship with the audience. So for us, we've seen such a benefit from modding that there wouldn't, you know, another XCOM game that we made, we would only work to improve that, yeah.
Oh, can I also ask a very quick follow-up question?
Mm-hmm.
How much input do you have into the character design process?
Quite a bit, yeah. I mean, it depends, but when it comes to like the concept of aliens and things like that, that's definitely.
So like, like having the specters be like weird things that have like nano, like.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back and forth, but some aliens come clearly almost fully formed from my brain, some of them not so much, and then the concept guys get involved, my art director get involved, the other designers get involved, and then it sort of like is a group process.
Yeah, all right, thanks.
Thank you.
Hey guys, I'm just wondering, you make very, very brutal games. Do you name your characters or your soldiers after your friends, after enemies, or just random?
Yeah, have you?
I don't name my guys after friends usually. No. What I tend to do is take a name. If I like one of the soldiers, especially in XCOM 2, I improve the name a bit and I don't change it that much because I've already got a relationship with it. So no, I don't tend to do that. Strangely.
I do. I have a character pool that is my siblings, my wife. And then
It's risky.
Yeah, I know, and a bunch of famous musicians. So it's like Beyonce and Sturgill Simpson, you know, and David Bowie, Starman, and I have them all decked out in my character pool. So every time I play, it's always, oh, look who's bonding. Oh, it's, you know, David Bowie, my wife. What the fuck, you know? Actually, that's a funny story. The Bond system, when it went in the first time, we were playing with my character pool. And Mark Nada, one of the designers, he had implemented the system, and I was like loading it up for the first time to see how it was working, and every single time I had like very low compatibility with my wife, and my brother and my wife had this very high compatibility. And it was enough where I rebooted enough times where I was like, all right, what the hell is going on here? Like, I don't know if my game's trying to tell me something.
I'm glad to know it's not just me who kills my family then.
Yeah, no.
Thanks.
You mean in the game, right? Okay. All right.
Totally, completely in the game.
All right. Somebody follow that man.
Hi. So my question is, with working in UE3, being a fantastic engine, was there ever any times where you had to sort of hold back with some design, choices because of engine issues?
No, I don't think so. We've got this awesome technical team, and so, you know, we completely redid the render for X2, and I mean, certainly UE3 is getting on. It's getting on in years, but for what we wanted to do with X2, no, a lot of times we would say, hey, this is what we want to do, and the tech guys, you know, it's standard development where they would say, you know, it's a very design-first company, and they believe in that, and they would say, we can do that, but, you know, they would work out with production and say, like, this is what it's going to cost you. So, but I don't remember any big features. I don't think there were any big things that we didn't put in because of tech. We just had to commit more resources to it.
Okay, cool.
Okay. So mainly for you, Jay, here, but remember how chrysalids used to be horrifying, brutal monsters?
Are you sure you don't want to ask Julian that question? Yes.
No, it's mainly to you.
Okay, all right.
How much did you end up toning down chrysalids for EU and then X2?
Not much. I mean, so the EU chrysalids came almost straight out of the UFO defense playbook. They weren't happy, smiley crab, that terrifying gray crab grin that would be. But the look wasn't the same, but they came almost out of my experiences of UFO defense, where my experience with it was if you saw one, you were dead. Like if you saw a chrysalid, you were dead. And the fact that they would then kill you and then you would spawn out zombie soldiers who could spawn chrysalids, that is all out of UFO defense. So, is there anything I missed with the chrysalids in Enemy Unknown from?
Well, they did spawn new chrysalids from the zombies that they created, I guess. So this was the same also, and that was if you had a runaway chrysalid explosion, you basically lost the whole battle. Yeah. So that's why they were so dangerous. Yeah. I mean, it was. People say it was the most scary monster in the original. It's certainly the most scary monster in Enemy Unknown as well, I think, without a doubt.
Yeah, I mean, to me, chrysalids, that would be something that I don't know that I would ever make an XCOM game and not have a chrysalid. I just don't think that would ever happen. What is your parallel in Phoenix Point?
I cannot say at this stage.
Oh, I see. The Thistleid.
Thistleid.
For legal reasons, it is called the Thistleid.
Okay, and one more question, maybe for both of you now. Has there ever been any one feature that you've wanted to add but couldn't for time reasons, costs, etc.?
Yeah, right.
Oh yeah, well, absolutely. The feature I really wanted to do properly was that when you blew up stuff, that the actual structural integrity of the building was kind of more realistic, and you can cause.
Oh my God, this is the most Julian thing of all time. Of course, you wanted to do that, which would be awesome.
But do that. And we tried to do it in XCOM Apocalypse. It kind of didn't work very well, but. Maybe technologically it is possible to do it now, but I still don't know. What else would I like to do? I think the other things also related to that. I want proper fire and smoke damage in the game. Because I was never satisfied with the way that worked in the original XCOM or XCOM Apocalypse or anything, so I think, okay, maybe that's just me, but...
Oh my goodness, I can only imagine how your programmers look at you. If I were to suggest we're going to do actual stress fracturing of structures,
that'd be cool.
They would say, that's fine, you just have to add 30 of us, and we'll do it. For me, I think the biggest thing, this was really a design mistake, but in XCOM 2, and the asset is still there, and actually, we were using it in War of the Chosen, but we had these vehicles, and they had turrets on their backs. And they're these big black tank-like vehicles with turrets on their backs. So we wanted to have enemy vehicles in X2. But of course, that's stupid because the cover, and I should have recognized this, but the problem is the cover needs to be spaced a certain distance based on the character's mobility. And that means that a vehicle, if it's driving and smashing all this cover, first of all, there's some cover, it looks ridiculous when it smashes, and some, it just can't do, and so basically it would destroy the level, and so we actually had them working for a little bit, these big tanks, but we ran out of time, and they just didn't make it.
That vehicle's actually in the very first gameplay trailer thing you did with the IGN.
It is.
Yeah, I remember seeing that back in the day.
Yeah, didn't make it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi guys. Just a quick question. You guys, how do you feel being responsible for so much swearing by gamers regarding the hit chance?
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times that I've sworn and my little girl's walked in. You're playing that alien game again, Daddy.
Corrupting children, yes.
I apologize. I'm really sorry. What can I say?
I'm defiant. No, it was Julian's fault. It's actually something I give quite a bit of thought to because I have the same moments, and most of the time now I play challenge mode, and I really enjoy it because it's this quick pop of XCOM. But especially when you pile points on top of it and a time pressure, and you miss a shot in challenge mode, it like exacerbates that feeling of like, this is so unfair. And trust me, I feel the exact same thing. And the people with offices on either side of mine, they will hear me and I'll be in there just going, oh, that is such bullshit, you know. And I have no one to blame but myself. But I've been giving that a lot of thought, and I think that's something to investigate as well, because it's not an entirely great experience, you know. It adds a lot, it adds drama, but at the same time, that's something that I am sort of like in the back of my head, I'm thinking, how can I do this in a way that's not quite so punishing? Because that's definitely, I'm sure you've had moments where you're just like, I'm turning this off.
I can't tell you how many
Rage
times
quit.
I've fought the game.
Yeah, you're just like, yeah, that's right. You play Iron Man, yeah, all the four. Yeah, no, that didn't count. That didn't count. Yeah, so yes, it's something I think about, and I feel the same aggravation.
Yeah, but a substantial minority of players have big problems with random numbers, and when you expose a random number so explicitly, like a percentage, for example, this can be a real problem for people to accept. I mean, people in general are not very good with actually managing random numbers, as has been proved by many psychologists. It's a problem for sure. How to deal with it better so that you still have the tension of the hit or miss, what's going to happen next, and yeah, it's very difficult.
Cool. Thank you very much, guys.
Yeah, hi. Seems there's been a lot of advances in artificial intelligence and machine learning recently. I just wondered what your thoughts are on, like, how this changes the mechanics of strategy games.
This is definitely a Julian question.
Well, I mean, the earliest AIs that I wrote were literally written in like 3K of memory for a Sinclair 48K Spectrum. But I actually think that the AI in these games has to have a sense that it's doing something intelligent but not be perfect, because you need the idea that you're playing against an entity which has some kind of personality, but it's not in itself perfect. In the original XCOM, for example, we actually put a significant random factor in whether an alien would actually move around the corner and shoot, or whether it would stay there and hide. And that random factor was biased based on the relative strength of forces and the distance and so on, but there was always that element of randomness. And that meant, from the player's point of view, actually probably induced a lot of paranoia, because you were never 100% sure that there was nothing around the corner, because the AI was not predictable. And actually, you can achieve a lot with this sense of unpredictability. It's not about making the perfect decisions every time, because that doesn't necessarily give you the best gameplay experience. But I think there is actually a lot of scope, though, to using AI to give computer opponents a lot more personality, which hasn't really been explored yet. And that would be interesting if someone could do it. Maybe we might be able to do this in Phoenix Point, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's value there. I think on strategic games even more than tactical games, but I think there's value in tactical games. But the thing that I think is very important is if the AI is doing something intelligent, it has to be backed up with some sort of visual confirmation or vocal confirmation, so the player says, oh, I get it. Because it's really, if you have things like fog of war, you actually can't tell sometimes when the AI does something very smart. You have no idea if that's just that. To a lot of people, it's hard to discern that pattern from a random decision. And so I think that it needs to be accompanied with, okay, now they're moving to flank. If I knew, hey, this is the two-turn plan of the AI, that would be very satisfying if you could then somehow interrupt that. But that's very challenging to do. But yeah, I think that's still, it's a huge frontier. You're absolutely right. It is a huge frontier for the games we make.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So you mentioned before that turn-based strategy was dead, and then XCOM brought it back. What do you think caused it to be dead, and then what made everyone think that it was back? Was it other things? As board games suddenly saw a big resurgence, which is essentially a turn-based strategy game in cardboard form, or so on and so forth. Was that part of it, or what do you think?
Well, I know what caused it to be dead in 1996. It was the massive amount of RTS games being developed. It's very clear to me. I mean, I went to Game Developers Conference in Santa Clara in 1996, and literally everybody was making RTS games. Everybody was trying to figure out pathfinding. It killed turn-based games stone dead. I mean, especially from the eyes of the publishers. This was a really big problem. And the real flag bearers for turn-based games are actually a lot of the Japanese developers and Nintendo with like Advance Wars, for example. It was almost killed off in PC games, except, of course, the flagship Civilization survived well. Everything else almost died a death. But of course, RTS games have gone the same way. They're overtaken by MOBAs now, so there's very few RTS games, big budget RTS games being developed. But in late 90s, the situation was just completely different. It was like everything was an RTS. It's difficult to convey how dominant this sort of genre was. And it's amazing how it's almost completely subsided or disappeared nowadays.
And it was interesting because turn-based games came back. So board games are entirely separate, and board games are going through like the best period that I've experienced with them. Board games, card games, amazing right now. Unrelated to, I believe, unrelated to the games necessarily, the video games, but when XCOM came along too, when XCOM Enemy Unknown came along, the other thing that happened was before that, late 2000s, there was this huge resurgence of indie games, and that also opened up a whole new market of players who were willing to try different mechanics. If people weren't so beholden to AAA graphics, then developers were happy to make, hey, let's re-experiment with turn-based games and stuff like that. And so it was sort of ripe. Right around the time Enemy Unknown was coming out, then you had more turn-based games, Banner Saga, and there were a lot of games around that time. So I think it was kind of like, in addition to Enemy Unknown, definitely was like the sort of rise of indies that sort of led to turn-based sort of getting a foothold back, I think. But yeah, it's true. Late 90s, I mean, it was if you weren't making an RTS or a shooter, like and that was because the industry was so squeezed at that point. It was all AAA, which is not the case now.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Thank you so much. Those are some brilliant questions. This has been such a massive pleasure, and thank you to both of you for coming along and chatting with us for a while. I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. And could we end with a big round of applause for Jake Solomon and Julian Gollop? Thank you very much.